Good evening and welcome, everyone. It's great to see such a terrific sea of faces out there. We're so pleased to have you joining us tonight for what I know will be a fascinating conversation featuring Dr. Paul Linde, who will be speaking on the topic of harm reduction and innovative methods to approach addiction treatment in San Francisco. My name is Kathy Bella, and I'm CEO here at Mechanics Institute, and we're delighted to be hosting tonight's event. If you're new to Mechanics Institute, we were founded in 1854, having just celebrated our 170th anniversary earlier this year. And we are very pleased to serve as one of San Francisco's most vibrant literary and cultural centers in the heart of the city. We feature a general interest library with a specialized collection in San Francisco and Bay Area history, an international chess club, an ongoing author and literary program series, book clubs, writing groups, chess classes and tournaments, and our Cinema Lit program, which is a film series on Friday evenings that features a selection of film genres for your enjoyment. And now some special information about tonight's guest. Paul is a native Minnesotan, a board-certified general adult psychiatrist with more than 30 years of clinical experience. He is the medical director for psychiatry and collaborative care at RIA Health, and he has expertise in treating substance use disorders and is specialized as a consultant to non-psychiatric physicians in both emergency departments and outpatient clinics. He is the author of 2 narrative nonfiction books about psychiatry in Africa and the ER, respectively, as well as is creator and host of a podcast entitled Hippie Docs 2.0, Rehumanizing Medicine. After receiving his medical doctorate at the University of Minnesota, Dr. Linde began his career as a psychiatric intern and resident at UCSF. He steadily received faculty promotions at the institution, teaching at the School of Medicine for several decades, and retiring with the title of Clinical Professor Emeritus in Psychiatry in 2020. At the same time, Dr. Linde pursued a multi-decade career in emergency psychiatric services. From 1989 to 2016, he worked on the front lines in psychiatric ERs, jails, and other high-pressure environments. His memoir on the subject, Danger to Self, on the front line with an ER psychiatrist, details the gritty day-to-day details of this challenging work. And we have copies of that available for sale after tonight's talk, and we'll talk about that a little bit more later. From 1994 to 1995, Dr. Linde was also taught and worked as a clinical psychiatrist in Zimbabwe. His 2002 book of Spirits and Madness, An American Psychiatrist in Africa, chronicled the challenges of cross-cultural psychiatric care and different cultural interpretations of mental illness. Dr. Linde has decades of experience in helping those with substance use disorders, particularly those with a dual diagnosis. Aside from his clinical work, he was medical director of the Stonewall Project in San Francisco from 2007 to 2013, providing harm reduction-based care for gay men and trans people struggling with drug addiction. During my husband's and my long-standing friendship with Paul, and after reading Danger to Self, I'm so pleased that he is joining us tonight to share his perspective on what often feels like an entrenched, pardon me, I'm tongue-tied tonight, entrenched issue in San Francisco. We look forward to him sharing his medical knowledge, professional wisdom, and his compassion with us tonight. Please join me in giving a warm welcome to Dr. Paul Linde.
Thank you, Kathy. I really appreciate it. I was looking for a new publicist, and I'm wondering if you want to. need a little extra work, yeah, I'll pay you cash. So for me, this is formal, right? For some people, this is casual, but for those in the audience who already know me, this is formal. So, yeah, I'm very excited to be here. It's really an honor and a privilege. I see this institute as this is so on for the public here, and I was looking at your website. I was really impressed with all the events that you have. I was really honored to be invited to speak here. So, once upon a time, San Francisco was the city that knew how. And part of what I'm going to talk about tonight is how it's been such a challenge to manage not just the homeless mentally ill, but also the challenge of dealing with the open air drug selling and use that's happening all throughout the city. But I wanted to spend a little more time just talking about my background. I mean, you did a great job, obviously, but as you can see, I'm a rolling stone when it comes to psychiatry. I've kind of done a lot of different jobs. But I would say the ones that really influenced me, I worked in the jail from 89 to 92 as a resident, 2 evenings a week, so jail psychiatric services. And that was like boot camp for psychiatry. And then I worked for 24 years at a psychiatric emergency at San Francisco General Hospital. So obviously seeing a lot of people at their worst, seeing a lot of people who I'll talk more about tonight, the people that you see out on the streets of San Francisco. So have a sense of certainly the clinical presentation, but also the humanity of folks out there. And then I did work for 8 years at the San Francisco AIDS Foundation, just a day a week as a medical director at the Stonewall Project. And if you're familiar with the Stonewall Project, it started with that name because it focused on treating men who have sex with men, and specifically those with methamphetamine addictions. It's kind of morphed into something more general since then, but I definitely have experience treating methamphetamine use disorder in that setting. And then I spent almost 5 years working in primary care. It was kind of my last gig at UCSF as a psychiatrist in primary care, which was seemed definitely a different, higher functioning slice of the population in general. And then I retired from UCSF in 2020, and so now I'm really what I would call semi-retired and work for a company called RIA Health. So to kind of lay things out for tonight, this is really kind of part education and part opinion piece. Definitely welcome discussion and conversation. We're going to leave plenty of time for Q&A. So some of the things I'm going to talk about I think are relatively controversial. Some are more straight up kind of educational, but I'm going to lay it out there. So I'm going to spend a chunk of the time talking about opioid use disorder, particularly as it impacts us day to day here in San Francisco with the fentanyl crisis. And then I'm going to spend the last section talking about alcohol use disorder. So a couple of things before I start. I don't know how many of you saw 3 weeks ago, there was an open forum piece in the San Francisco Chronicle. It was written by Grant Colfax and Hillary Coons. So Grant Colfax is an HIV doc. He's the director of health for the city of San Francisco. He's been there probably for 10 years. A really great HIV doc and a really great leader, actually. He and Mayor Reed did a tremendous job during COVID working together. Hillary Coons has been in the position of director of behavioral health for the city for a few years. Her background is in internal medicine and addiction medicine. So you've got experienced doctors who are healthcare leaders. And basically, I don't know if you saw the article, but basically he had to put it out in a public forum that essentially California in general and San Francisco as well is that we're not effective at getting treatment for people with opioid use disorder. And that a medication such as methadone, which has been around for decades, is kind of still strangled in both federal and state bureaucracy. And the evidence from a research perspective is very clear that methadone saves lives, gets people off heroin and fentanyl. And then there's a newer medication called Suboxone or buprenorphine, which also treats it. But I just thought it's really something when your healthcare leaders have to go to open forum to express their dissatisfaction with the lack of access to treatment. So kind of brings me to one of my main points for the night, and that is the fact that our elected leaders don't defer to our public health care leaders when it comes to public health issues. And to me, it's akin to if you went to your surgeon, you're going to have surgery, and the surgeon says, I'll be in the room, but I was going to have my office manager do it. Are you okay with that? Can the office manager do your surgery? And I know it's kind of dramatic, but it's kind of the attitude about substance use disorders and people who use drugs, that it's different somehow. You know, and substance use disorders are a medical condition. They come in a different package than other medical conditions, but this is a group of people who are often highly stigmatized. So it's just kind of disturbing to me that the elected leaders won't defer to the experts in this matter, and that politicizes it. I will come back to that shortly. A couple things another thing I wanted to say about elected leaders and politicians is, I was reading about Tim Walz when he was being vetted to be the vice presidential candidate for Harris. And one of the, and I'll be really honest, I really ate it up because I'm from Minnesota. I can say, I don't know that guy, but I know that guy. So I've never met him, but he's very reminiscent of a lot of Midwestern characters. Definitely, oh my God, high school social studies teacher and football coach to a T. But what I wanted to say is that he one of the things I read is he said, most politicians burn their political capital on getting reelected. And he said, I'd rather burn my political capital on improving people's lives. And it's not really just a soundbite, it's really the way that he approaches things. And I wish more elected leaders would burn some of their political capital on improving people's lives. So I don't want to stand up here and tee off on elected leaders. They have a tremendously difficult job. They have a lot of pressure. I have no doubt that most of them have really good intentions and do want to improve people's lives. But I also think that they're focused on getting reelected. And so you could say, well, what good am I if I can't get reelected? Not in terms of my self-esteem, but in terms of I want to do the things that are important for our society and our culture. I need to be in the office. But I think that the ambition sometimes takes over. So you don't want to be one and done if you're elected. So I get it, and I also understand that most people in those positions, they really do want to do the right thing. Having said that, I often don't see the courage that I would like to see, the boldness, the vision, taking some chances. And specifically, I'm going to talk about overdose prevention centers and the Tenderloin Center in respect to that. So I want to talk, before I get there, and I definitely want to get there, it's kind of the heart of the talk. I want to kind of give a brief primer on substance use disorders. So language matters, as you know, and language is changing around how we define conditions around substance use. So historically, we use terms like alcoholic. We use terms like alcohol abuse. And essentially, that sort of type of language in psychiatry with regards to schizophrenia got sort of stamped out about 15 or 20 years ago because, for example, it's not a schizophrenic, it's a person with schizophrenia. But it took longer for sort of change the language around substance use. The term addiction, kind of mixed, everybody knows what it is, but it's probably not the way to go. So I will say substance use disorders, that term really took on more power in about 10 years ago when DSM-5 came out. And I don't know if you guys are familiar with DSM. For God's sakes, don't call it the Bible of American psychiatry. Oh my God, that's journalistic laziness. I can't stand it. It's nobody's Bible. It's a diagnostic guidebook. So it drives me crazy. The other thing that drives me crazy is when journalists use the word schizophrenic completely, devoid of what schizophrenia really is. So DSM-5, and I'm not a huge fan of DSM in general, but DSM-5 did make some changes. One of the changes they made that was beneficial is they changed the concept of diagnosing substance use disorders. So the old nomenclature was alcohol abuse or substance abuse and substance dependence, and honestly, the criteria were very confusing. It was really hard to sort out, is this abuse, is this dependence? And so they did a really good job of sort of combining both the physical, medical aspects of addiction along with the psychosocial aspects. And they changed the name. So there's substance use disorders now. So alcohol use disorder, opioid use disorder, etc. And what they did was they changed criteria for it to be much more user-friendly diagnostically. And you, again, it manages sort of the physical parts of I'll say addiction and withdrawal, but also addresses the psychosocial aspects. So substance use disorders, and I remember the first time I heard somebody, this was about 10 years ago, this doc that I was working with was kept saying AUD, 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 you got AUD, and at the time I'm like, what the hell is AUD? But it's a shorthand for alcohol use disorder, so it's a nomenclature that we use day to day at the job that I'm doing currently. So I also want to sort of point out that there's a really big difference between the substance use disorders when you look at each substance. And because basically you get sort of a different form of treatment, a different form of presentation, and it's a big difference between treating somebody with opioid use disorder and alcohol use disorder, as an example. And so part of it is that we now have evidence-based treatments for substance use disorders, medications sometimes. So for example, opioid use disorder, what are the FDA accepted approved methods of treating it with a medication? Well, it's methadone, which has been around for decades, and it's buprenorphine or Suboxone. So there's evidence-based established treatment for opioid use disorder. Alcohol use disorder, there are 3 FDA approved medications, naltrexone, acamprosate, and antabuse or disulfiram. And so we know that those help people reduce or stop drinking. So when it comes to other drugs, it's not as clear cut. So methamphetamine, stimulant addiction, for example, there's no accepted medication treatment for that. Cannabis use disorder, no accepted treatment for that. We've tried different medications for that, but they present very differently. And the other thing I wanted to say about that is that the way that we use the language of abstinence versus harm reduction is different for different substances. So harm reductions, have you guys noticed harm reductions become such a dirty word in our public discourse? And I guess for me, it makes more sense if I explain the history of the concept of harm reduction. Makes it a little bit easier to understand. So the term I like for alcohol is moderation or control rather than harm reduction, but I'll get to that. So harm reduction started really as a concept, I would say probably in the 1980s and 90s. And how it came about is that the concept is around injection drug users. So injection drug users are at risk for getting HIV, getting hepatitis C, having infections. And so the thought was getting people off of the needle and on other methods of using. So smoking, meth, or snorting cocaine instead of injecting it. And so it really came from a public health perspective. And that's the way we think about it. When you talk about harm reduction for alcohol, it seems fuzzier, and I think people are more uncomfortable with using that language for that. So harm reduction really came from the 80s and 90s from a public health perspective. And treatment of a substance use disorder, the goal is always abstinence. So what I see in the media is people making a big deal about abstinence only versus harm reduction, and honestly, I have a strong opinion that they're part of the same continuum. We don't have to be at odds with each other when we use this language. That to get to abstinence often involves a path to harm reduction. And I want to give an example of from the media. So I think the San Francisco Chronicle has done a really good job reporting on mental illness, on drug use, on homelessness issues. researching for tonight, I was looking up stuff up, and I was shocked at how many San Francisco Examiner articles there are. I don't know about you guys, but I don't follow the Examiner, but I was really impressed with the quality of the reporting, by the way. So, a couple people show up all the time in these abstinence versus harm reduction arguments. One is Matt Dorsey. So Matt Dorsey's a supervisor here in San Francisco. He's adamantly abstinence only, and that's his policy. So pushing the abstinence only way. And I have a lot of respect for him. I don't know him personally, but I know his personal story is that he himself went through recovery. The abstinence only model worked great for him. 12 steps, abstinence, and it saved his life. And so 12-step Alcoholics Anonymous, Narcotics Anonymous can be life-saving and works great for some people. The flip side, the other person you often see quoted in the media is a guy named Gary McCoy. And Gary McCoy is the vice president at Health Right 360. And I don't know if you guys are familiar with Health Right 360, but it's probably the most prominent nonprofit provider of addiction treatment in the city. They came about from a merger between Walden House and Haight-Ashbury Free Clinic. And they're kind of a force of nature. You often see her CEO, their CEO, Vitka Eisen, is interviewed in the media. But their VP, I think, for public relations, his name is Gary McCoy. And Gary McCoy has been very open about his journey with addiction. It took him 14 years to become abstinent from drugs. 14 years. The slips, the problems, I mean, a long journey, 14 years. So he's someone who advocates for harm reduction. And in part, right, we're all influenced by our own personal experiences. I mean, that's the source of bias, right, by nature. And I always was like, confirmation bias? What's wrong with that? You know? But anyway, you look at biases. So is it to say that Matt Dorsey's path to recovery was somehow better than Gary McCoy's path to recovery? And I put that out there as sort of a rhetorical question, and I would say no. So basically the way I look at it is trying to help people get through a substance use disorder kind of takes all hands on deck. It takes any approach that works. It takes flexibility. And I think adherence to sort of rigid principles is really important. So let's talk a bit about overdose prevention centers. So harm reduction efforts in San Francisco really go back also, beyond the sort of addressing, switching people from using needles to using other ways of using. The other part of harm reduction in San Francisco has been clean needles programs. So, and that getting clean needles to people who inject drugs has been around really probably since the 90s. And I know now there's some organizations that do a lot of it, Project Rubio, San Francisco AIDS Foundation do that as well. So some of this has been around for quite a while. So the overdose prevention center is kind of a next step in that process. So overdose prevention centers are also called sometimes safe injection sites or safe consumption sites. And as you guys probably know, and again in retrospect I wish I had visited, but I didn't, the Linde Center was open for less than a year. Mayor Green declared a public health emergency in early 2022, and at the time, one of the responses to the public health emergency was open the Linde Center. And so the Linde Center basically provided a place for people to use drugs safely under supervision, and really the harm reduction element is you have people who can die from fentanyl or heroin. Opioids can kill you, they can be lethal, and so you can use Narcan, naloxone to reverse it. But they also give oxygen therapy as well. They don't always give a Narcan shot. So 400 overdoses approximately were prevented within the center. And during that same time in San Francisco, about 1,500 overdoses were prevented. And so that it's a proven model. So in the U.S., the main place for overdose prevention centers is in New York City. So there's an organization called On Point NYC. They've been around since 2021. And the difference is, and this is sort of gets into more of the details, is that they're privately funded. So they don't take any federal money. So they haven't been under the spotlight that other overdose prevention centers have that take federal money. And so, and I'll get to this as well, but that's been a sticking point here in San Francisco, is the fear that the feds are gonna shut them down. So on Point NYC, Philadelphia proposed something called Safe House, and that's the one place where the federal government sued them. In 2019, the Department of Justice sued that organization during the Trump administration, and so that stopped the development of an OPC, overdose prevention center in Philly. The state of Rhode Island has passed legislation to open an overdose prevention center, which is supposed to open later this year. What other states? Minnesota, Governor Walz. A bill was signed in Minnesota by the legislature, and Tim Walz signed that bill in 2023 to open an overdose prevention center. Probably forgetting a couple more. But basically the sticking point here in San Francisco is that Mayor Breed and David Chu, the city attorney, have decided that they don't want to risk the federal government suing them or shutting the place down. And I understand that concern, but I also feel like the scope of the problem is such that perhaps it's worth trying something different. For example, to take a chance to do something more bold and innovative. And there's a fear factor. Governor Newsom vetoed a bill that was passed in California in 2022 to open overdose prevention centers on a pilot basis. So this wasn't like carte blanche, we're gonna open these everywhere. It was on a pilot basis in SF, LA, and I forget the third city. He vetoed it. Mayor Breed closed the Tenderloin Center in December of 2022. And not entirely clear why. But let me talk about overdose prevention centers first. I can't wait to get into the politics. It's the stuff that makes me crazy. But so overdose prevention centers, I mean, let's face it. I mean, I think that there's the reaction to the people who are stooped over, folded over at the waist with the fentanyl foil at their feet. The people lying on the sidewalk, drooling in their foil, in their fentanyl pipe. The people who are running through the street, screaming. Matt, we work in psych emergency at the general. Like I'll be driving around town with my wife and I see somebody just screaming, running through intersections, and I'm like, it's Matt. I tell my kids, it's Matt. It's not. It's almost always Matt. And about half the patients who come in psych emergency are on Matt. And we used to fight over those cases. The reason why is that the mental status is presented to you in real time. So the write-up's easy because you can't sit down and interview for an hour. And then you're going to give them a shot. And they're going to go to sleep. And they're probably not going to wake up until your shift is over. So we would be, that's my case. Part of this, see those cases over and over and over and over again. And it looks exactly like a manic episode, a psychotic manic episode. So the number of people, the percentage of people who present like that about having a psychotic manic episode and are not on that in San Francisco, maybe 5%. So basically, my point is I think that the people that we know are using drugs heavily and impacted by them. It's really tough. I live in the city. I've lived in San Francisco since 1988. I own a home. I raise kids here. And I live in Noe Valley. It's pretty cush over there. I mean, I generally don't come down to this neighborhood. I generally don't go through the TL. I don't go through parts of Soma. In part because it's difficult. I don't know what to do. And so, but I guess my point is that this is a very disempowered group of people. I think it's easy to not consider their constituency in making decisions. And they're very voiceless and powerless. And the reality is the vast majority of those patients suffer severe childhood trauma. And so going this tough on crime, trying to incarcerate yourself out of a social problem is not the way to handle this. And in fact, I'm going to get into politics. I can't help myself. myself. But I mean, I think that the problem is I'm not against interdiction. I'm not against the tough on crime approach, is what we're having right now. I'm not against it, but it has to be balanced by a more sane, reasonable treatment approach. What I am against in terms of incarcerating you out of the problem is arresting drug users for possession. I'm definitely against that. Am I against arresting low-level dealers? No, I'm for that. That's fine. But for crying out loud, can't we get a little further up the food chain in organized crime and get to the people who are actually calling the shots? Because the low-level drug dealers are, not in much better shape often than the users. And in fact, a lot of those people have left untenable situations in their home countries, and I'm sure also have tremendous amount of trauma. It's harder for me to be empathic and compassionate with those folks, to be honest with you, than drug users on the street. So early childhood abuse, sexual, physical neglect, is highly associated with changes in the brain. And I went to a conference recently, a lot of materials presented from both animal studies and human studies, is that the stress response is forever altered. You have people who have experienced trauma and they are set up for ongoing symptoms from their trauma. Their risk for substance use is kind of through the roof. So most people who've had trauma, most people who have an opioid use disorder for sure have a severe trauma history. So the question is, you can arrest someone who is hooked on fentanyl for possession, take them to jail. Wait a second, what do you think? The jail medical staff and the jail psychiatric staff? What's the jail medical staff supposed to do? Are they going to give them methadone? I don't know what they do now. But I mean, so here you are, you drop somebody who's addicted to fentanyl in the jail. I'm the triage nurse for the night. Oh my God, again? Ugh, what do I do? So the reality is that fair really to overload jail medical, jail psychiatric services with these patients? No, it's not. Is jail a good place to get mental health or substance treatment? Absolutely not. It's not that the people working there are unqualified. They definitely are. It's a great group of nurses, physicians, and mental health professionals. But it's the setting, right? Are you going to get better when you're incarcerated or not? I heard a stat a few years back that said the biggest mental institution in the U.S. is the LA County Jail, which is probably still true. So my point is if you're going to arrest drug users for possession as your tough on crime approach and drop them in your jail, or drop them on the doorstep of the ER at the general, I think that it's not a solution to the problem, and I think you're punishing people who are suffering, for sure suffering, and suffering from a medical condition that's potentially treatable. So I have a lot of trouble with arresting drug users for possession. I understand why we do it. Pity, disgust, frustration, anger. I came down here a week ago to go to the ACT, talking to my friend, and we're like these compassionate people. I'm over it. I don't want to come down here. And so part of it is even people who have compassion fatigue. And I feel the same way. I have a friend in the audience who has an office at night admission, and he tells me harrowing stories of Narcanning people in the street regularly. And so I do think there's a fatigue factor, compassion fatigue. And then the anger also is we're spending all this money. What are we doing? What are we accomplishing? So I clearly don't have the answer. But I mean, my 2 cents is that we do need to enforce the laws. But I know there's a law against drug use. But I don't think we should be taking those people to jail. Maybe the hospital. Probably the hospital's a better way to talk to them. So I feel strongly about this. I want to talk about decriminalization for a moment. So we already have decriminalization, by the way. What are the cannabis laws? Recreational cannabis is decriminalization. So we have it with cannabis. I think here locally we have it for psilocybin, I think, as well. mean, I'm really standing up here honestly going, why not at least ask the question? Because what we're doing now is not working. And I'm not saying I know exactly what we should do. I'm not saying, I don't know exactly what we should do. But what I'm pretty angry with our elected leaders, particularly 4 out of the 5 mayoral candidates here, were on record against doing anything innovative for this population. So I'm really upset about that. And since we're failing, why not try something different? And why don't we have the gumption, the guts, the courage to try something different? If the federal government is going to sue the city of San Francisco to shut down their overdose prevention center, probably just shut it down. I read this thing today written by the Examiner reporter, which is really good. He wrote an article in June about all the mayoral candidates' views on overdose prevention center. And Mayor Reed, well, I don't want our city attorneys to get disbarred over this. And I'm like, that's pretty absurd. I'm sorry. And the problem is, though, the Democratic administration and now the Trump administration, they haven't come out with any clarity on this. So these overdose prevention centers are operating in the dark. They don't know what the White House thinks about it because they don't say. They don't know what the DOJ is going to do. So there's a lack of clarity. So, but I'm just like, why can't we try something different? I want to mention a book by a journalist called Johan Hari, H-A-R-I, called Chasing the Scream. It's now about 10 years old, and the print honestly was so small in the paperback edition, I was really struggling. It's a function of age, obviously. But I did read the whole book, and it's bad. The book's been out about 10 years, but essentially he's building a case for full decriminalization and ending the war on drugs. Because, and I agree with him on this, the war on drugs perpetuates violence. Organized crime loves it. They love the war on drugs. They hate decriminalization. Their market dries up. You see what happened with cannabis in California when we legalized it? The illicit market collapsed, supply and demand. So if you're selling weed 20 years ago in California and growing it in Humboldt County, once it's legalized, your business model is shot. Organized crime with meth, with fentanyl, with heroin, it's the exact same thing. So perpetuating the war on drugs is in the best interest of organized crime. Now it makes us feel good, right? Oh, we're tough on crime. Oh my God, we're badass, oh, are we, you know. And again, I'm not against law enforcement. I'm not against enforcing the laws. I'm glad we have all of that in place. But it's not working. So Portugal, for example, has decriminalized opioids for about 20 plus years. And so this sounds so radical and crazy, but when they keep confronting or running across drug users on the street, they give them the option for treatment, which I know we do here. But rather than say, I'm going to arrest you, you don't go into treatment, which is what some of our candidates are now talking about. If you won't go to treatment, I'm arresting you, which is crazy. Because anybody in here who's worked with people suffering from substance use disorders know that it's a chronic condition. Relapses are part of the fabric. It could take several rounds to get clean and sober, and people have to be ready. Oh, I also thought about this, Willie Brown. You remember Willie Brown? In the 90s, treatment on demand. Do you guys remember that? In the 90s, we should offer treatment on demand. I remember working at a hospital going, oh my God, we can't get treatment beds. But the concept was spot on. He was far ahead of his time in that you keep offering treatment, and when they're ready, that's when you send them. Which is kind of what we do now, honestly, but now it's treatment. Treatment on demand is reversed. It's the authorities going, I demand you go to treatment or I'm going to arrest you. I mean, that is, if you read what Mark Farrell talks about, that's some of the stuff you're reading, Tough on Crime. So, all right, I can't help myself with politics, I'm going to go there. So I'm going to give a report card to the mayoral candidates on this topic. Heaven help me. So Asha Safai gets an A. And he's going to finish last. Asha Safai gets an A. He's on board with this concept. if he were mayor, he would somehow make it happen. And basically what he says, we spend $16 billion a year. Our budget is $16 billion here in San Francisco. Why not try something different? Why not try something that's proven to reduce overdose deaths? Why not try something that links people to services? You think of those people folded over in half out on the street. They go to the Tenderloin Center, you know what they get? They get to wash their clothes. They get to take a shower. They get a hot meal. They might be able to get a case manager. They might get job training. And 200 of them, from the Tenderloin Center, 200 of them got permanent housing out of the Tenderloin Center. So you get all these other services. It's not just, oh, let's sit around and watch these people get high while the dealers toss the drugs over the fence, which I'm sure happened. You know, that's probably really true. So, so Asha Supply gets an A, but he's probably going to finish it. Aaron Peskin gets a C. He's pretty much against it, but not as vociferously as Farrell and Reed. So Farrell gets an F, Reed gets a D. The reason Reed gets a D is she's had a chance to show what she's going to do. And for a long time, she was a proponent of harm reduction. She was going to let Grant Colfax, Hillary Kunin's going to drive public health treatment of substance use disorders. But she had a change in 2022 when she closed the Tenderloin Center, and she now sent in the National Guard. So I'm going to give her a D. Farrell gets an F. He just comes across to me as just a hard ass, and that's what people want. And it's sort of, you know, let's stick it to a common mentality. And so, and then so I mean, who's in front? Well, from my reading, Farrell and Reed are kind of neck and neck. So they're the D's and the F's. So Daniel Lurie, I'm going to be very charitable, no pun intended. Daniel Lurie gets an incomplete. Now, he should probably be getting a C- or a D+. But I'm going to admit I had high hopes for him. They're tempered a lot now when I actually looked into his position on this issue. And he's pretty much in line with Farrell and Reed. But then talks about, if I'm mayor, I'll put in a comprehensive behavioral health management plan, which sounds good. And I'm thinking that maybe because he's in the nonprofit world, because he can pay for his own campaign, and he's not as politically connected, maybe he'll have the courage to do something different. So I'm kind of hopeful for Daniel Lurie, but when I found out he's against it on paper, C- D+, but I'm giving him an incomplete. Now, Asha Safai gets an A, but he's probably going to finish last, and Farrell. So that's just on this issue. I know it's more complex than that. I mean, I think there are reasons to look for candidates on something other than this. Haven't really decided what I'm going to do. So, God, I didn't even talk about alcohol. I know. Shoot.
Want to do a little bit, and then we can move to
Yeah, I can do 5 minutes. So my colleague, Dr. John Mendelson's in the audience. So he co-founded a company 8 years ago called Linde Health, and this is not a paid advertisement. But I'm a medical director there. I've been in for 4 years. We treat AUD, alcohol use disorder, remotely nationwide. A lot of our patients are higher functioning, although we're starting to treat sicker patients. It's very rewarding to work with motivated patients. After working at the General for 25 years, actually having patients who are invested in their own treatments is really fun. But what I wanted to talk about is this abstinence moderation dichotomy. Because with alcohol, a lot of people are so afraid to commit abstinence. And if they're drinking 6 or more drinks a day, they're going to perhaps have a withdrawal seizure or end up in the hospital if they stop cold turkey. Probably more 10 or more drinks a day. So first of all, it's not really medically safe to stop cold turkey at a certain point. And reduction works, and so I'm thinking more of Gary McCoy than Matt Dorsey. Gary McCoy took 14 years. I mean, most of the patients we work with are a lot faster than that. So, but I can say that working toward a goal of moderation, And when people come to you, and know it's an option, they're so relieved. So I can't tell you how many patients have told me, the concept of somebody telling me I can never drink again makes me want to drink a lot. And so those people are like, hey, guess what? And they say, I want to stop, but I can't stop that fast. And so we'll slowly reduce. Medication we prescribe, the program we have allows people to reduce. But what I really want to say is we're very open-minded and open-hearted with patients who go to certain programs and they're demeaned. They're treated roughly. And they're told all or nothing things, rigidity. And they come to us and it's like, so we're not like hippy dippy, oh yeah, go ahead and drink, it's fine. You know, I mean, people have this concept in harm reduction that you're like encouraging alcohol use and drug use. No, of course not. Abstinence is the goal. That's the ideal. So it's not like that. But I mean, really, it's being practical and allowing people to make their own decisions based on the information. And so I believe it's a way to go. But I like the language of moderation better than harm reduction. Because harm reduction is kind of a loaded term these days, and I think harm reduction is around injection drug users. So I'm taking a real personal interest in this issue between abstinence and harm reduction, as you can tell with my diatribe tonight. So anyway, I'm gonna stop it there and open up for questions.
Andy's going to be coming by with the microphone.
I'm going to come by to folks with the mic, so I'll work my way from the back forward if folks have questions. Desiree, fabulous, coming to you.
Hi, thanks for your remarks.
Sure.
I'm sort of reminded of William Styron's book about his problem with alcoholism, and he recounted that after his enormous battle with alcoholism, he was suddenly faced with his depression. That, of course, was the reason for the alcoholism, and it strikes me that without a follow-up program for people to actually deal with the trauma that got them there, then we're just going to repeat the cycle, and that those things have to go hand in hand. So I wanted to see what you thought about that, but I also have a question that's just rank curiosity. You have to forgive me for this question, but you'll be able to tell that I live in San Francisco. You see fentanyl users on the street in these unbelievably contorted positions that just would take a gymnast their entire lifetime to achieve.
Yeah.
And I've seen people now call it the fentanyl fold.
Right.
And you see people completely folded over in an attitude that is asleep at the same time while standing. And my curiosity is there something about that drug that does something to your connective tissue that allows, it's just, I'm so curious. I look at it and I think that would take a gymnast a lifetime to be able to achieve that attitude, that physical attitude.
I'll answer the second question first to the best of my ability. So I mean, I think I'm sorry, this is going to sound sarcastic, but it's extreme relaxation that they do that. But I mean, honestly, I think part of it is there is some muscle relaxant properties of the opioids. I can't get my head around it. I mean, I read the story in the Chronicle also, and all the descriptions by physicians that were made were like, I don't know, I don't think anybody knows. Maybe Dr. Mendelson has a theory. What do you think, John?
I have no idea.
Good, thank you. I thought, oh my God, here I am, the professors out there, the graduate students not answering the question.
We never saw it in that.
Yeah, that's true. With heroin.
Back in the heroin days, people were like standing in line, itching and vomiting, or you never bent over and I've never. It's really incredible.
It's like something out of a science fiction.
They have proprioception and relaxation. They're still able to stand, but not, I mean, why don't they just fall over? I mean, because, and opium dens, they have long opium pipes.
Yeah.
That's because if you inhale opium, you pass out. You pass out. That's what they're laying down. All the pictures of opium dens, everyone's laying down flat and have these long pipes, you don't burn yourself. And so I have no idea how they're doing that.
So the other question about basically addressing what I call root causes of drinking or excessive drinking, and then specifically.
And drug use as well.
And drug use, yeah, for sure. I guess I had my alcohol hat on. That, yes, of course. I mean, the concept of self-medication is useful. I mean, I know it's in the popular lexicon, but I think it's really useful. People self-medicate anxiety. Of course, people self-medicate depression. And I think for me, yes, the root cause needs to be addressed and identified first of all. And people with trauma histories are more prone to depression. And the thing with trauma, it can manifest multiple different ways. It really is complex. So yeah, I mean, integrated treatment for sure. I mean, medications can help people reduce or stop. Other psychosocial treatments can also help change the behavior. But part of what you're talking about is having really a mental health therapy component to address underlying root cause. I mean, sometimes medications can be super helpful if depression is root cause or self-medicating. Medications aren't always the answer, but I do that every day in my practice. But yeah, I totally agree with you that it needs to be an integrated approach.
Hi, thank you for the talk. You talked about policy at a couple different points, but I didn't hear you talk about the housing first approach versus sober housing. And for context, this is the simplistic example, but it's a real example. One of my friends was a homeless heroin addict, went through detox, did a sober house, ended up in an SRO, and his neighbor was a heroin addict. And one of those two people is going to be homeless at the end of the day, you know what I mean?
So are you referring to programs in some cities where they let people use in the hotel?
Exactly, where there's not a requirement for physical sobriety to enter into the house.
Yeah, I'm definitely for that. I mean, I think what it comes down to, honestly, with alcohol and drug use in a housing situation, at the end of the day, it's what's your behavior. You know, if you're someone who has, half a bottle of vodka every day, but you comport yourself and you go home and pass out, I'm fine with that. I mean, I think it's the way the reality is. So it's a lot about behavior, and where it gets tricky with behavior, obviously stimulus. So methamphetamine and cocaine. But from my perspective, I think that it should be allowed. I think that, and the thing is like if you want to pilot it, let's do these 3 hotels and see what happens. And that's what kind of kills me about some people in that show. It's a pilot. And just gibberish about, I mean, his response is ridiculous, politically calculated. I guess that's my point. Or Newsom, Breed, Farrell, they're hewing to the center. And you know what? I'm going to say political calculation looks pretty good. Breed and Farrell are on top here with this one time stance. But so I'm sort of for allowing that. I mean, obviously for behavior that's out of control, it's not going to work. So does that answer your question?
Yeah.
I think, what is your personal definition for the word addiction?
Oh, didn't I say we don't use that term? No, I'm going to try to answer your question. So I used to think it was just a physical dependence, right? So physical dependence is, what's the intoxication state look like? Do you have a withdrawal? I mean, having withdrawal symptoms is sort of pathognomonic for having a dependence, physical dependence. And also tolerance, and also needing to use greater, needing to use more. But I've really come around to, I'd say in the last 5 to 10 years, that addiction is more complex than that it involves these other factors. It involves how do you function, can you hold a job, what's your relationship like, have you had legal consequences, have you been incarcerated, have you been hospitalized? And so I kind of now sort of put it all together as a more comprehensive term, including both sort of physical, medical aspects and more psychosocial aspects. And it really, for me, I don't have that much trouble with that term, and I kind of sort of make it synonymous with substance use disorder. I mean, that's the way I think about it. I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah, because it's user creative. There's gambling addiction, it's any
Yeah.
addiction, it's just user creative.
Yeah, that's a good point. So in psychiatry, we call those impulse control disorders. So, you know, which I mean, I think all substance use disorders are partially an impulse control disorder, but the behavioral addictions are thought to sort of be different. But I don't know, it's a good question. Thank you.
Hi, Paul. Thanks for this great talk. I have a sort of tangential alcohol question. I just got back from Scandinavia, and among other things, I went into one of their government or run stores, which was fascinating. But the prevalence of non-alcoholic beverages was like off the charts, which was really interesting, and it is here as well, beers and all sorts of things. But I've been reading a lot about like non-alcoholic drinks and like on menus and kids, that being an issue that pediatricians are worried about. And I'm just curious in that scope of like you talked about abstinence versus moderation. And I tend to have more of a European attitude towards drinking and have trouble with some of my friends that are completely sober and talk about it all the time. And just curious about what you think on that front.
I mean, I think of non-alcoholic drinks, beer, wine, spirits, in recovery are extremely useful as people are reducing. They start to mix in NA, beer, etc. So I think they're fantastic. I also hope that the beverage industry takes notice and maybe shifts some of their manufacturing in that area. Oh my God, I didn't even talk about the beverage industry, but I'm going to tell you, there's going to be a day when the beverage industry is going to be on the hook like big tobacco was.
Yeah.
It's coming, so it's going to be a while. It's a very strong lobby, but their best customers are dying of cirrhosis. So they need to be more accountable. Sorry, anybody in the beverage industry. Any distributors? Any drinkers?
Actually, the non-alcohol beverage movement is, the beverage industry loves it because there's no tax on it. You think about it, your non-alcohol beer, there's a 17 or 20% tax, it's like effectively an alcohol content, right? So, if you sell alcohol-free stuff at the same price as the stuff that's got alcohol, who wouldn't do that? Right? And if we do put in taxes based strictly on alcohol volume, like Scotland and England have done, we'll just encourage lower alcohol beverages. That would be great. That would be fantastic. That's a pathway that a lot of people are interested in. So I think the reason we don't have the same consumption standards is because we're doing the pitch all wrong. The pitch should not be about the people using the drugs. The pitch should be about everyone who lives in the city. And in Vancouver, I went to the injection site in Vancouver, and it was not sold as a place to prevent overdoses. It was sold as a place to prevent abscesses, HIV infection, right, and trash. Okay, and those are the metrics they use to decide whether or not to keep the safe consumption site. There was no interest in the person who's using drugs, none. And you don't have to have any interest in that to say we'd like our streets to have less trash on them. We'd like to have less abscesses. We'd like to have less ambulance transports for overdoses. So that is the pitch we should all do. We should stop saying we're going to have any concern about this guy who's folded in half with a pipe in front of him, right? And start saying we have a big concern about what our city looks like, and how we live. That was the pitch for bars. The other safe consumption site that everyone here uses is a bar or a restaurant. You're not allowed to drink on the street. You say decriminalize alcohol. It's not legal to use alcohol on the street. And if you're outside drinking out of an open container on the street, you will be arrested, right? You will be arrested. If you have an open container in your car, you will be arrested, right? So decriminalization, we actually have criminal penalties for alcohol use outside of social acceptance zones. And I think that's the real question. What's the social acceptance zone for use, right? And we should all get up and say, look, we want a safe consumption center, not for that guy who's going to die from an overdose. Sure, I care about that guy, but I I care a hell of a lot more about the trash on my stoop, you know, right? You know what I'm saying?
So you should draft this up and send it around.
See,
I mean, seriously, I mean, I think part of it is, having a different approach, and you're right, I mean, I'm coming at it from, a doctor's point of view, I wanna help
Yeah,
everybody,
and you
but.
don't need anything for treatment. The other thing about the safe consumption site people don't realize, you're not allowed to, so the Vancouver one had a big problem. Oh, so some guy brings drugs in and wants to sell them to someone else. Is that okay? Right? In other words, that's why I should set up my little shop, right? I should go in the safe consumption center at 8 a.m., leave at 6 p.m., or when I sell out. Because so there's no trafficking allowed at safe consumption sites. You gotta bring your own in. So they had these stories like a blind guy is brought in, and you have to fix your own shot, right? So a blind guy comes in, he can't use it because he can't give himself a shot. Right? Like there were like a bunch of, but no trafficking. So trafficking. So the second thing that is totally unappreciated on safe consumption sites, you register when you go in with your name and an ID, and that name and ID is given to the police department. You're now registered with the police department as a drug user. Okay? You're also on the way out. The entrance door to the Vancouver Center is not the same as the exit. Exit door, you have to go through like a Disney shop of social workers and methadone clinics, right? You had to run a gauntlet of people who wanted to help you. So, right? Like offer you free, and if we really want to prevent things, the next step up, just give out free buprenorphine. Just give it out. What the heck? You don't want trafficking. You want to put the dealers out of business. Just give the freaking drugs out, right? They just got to use them there. They can't leave with them. They got to go in the arm, and they can walk out the door. And if they want, they can stop and talk to the friendly social worker gift person. Right? Pick up a picture and right? It is.
I think we lost you. Oh, there's Andrew. Thank you. Other questions?
So my question assumes that you have a magic wand, and that you use your magic wand to create a methadone program here in San Francisco, sort of ignoring state and federal problems. Just if you were allowed to just build it and fund it, what would you do?
Well, I mean, I think that I'm kind of going a bit on what I understand they do in Portugal. So they actually give people opioids who are shooting heroin or smoking fentanyl. They give them prescription opioids and have them take them. I mean, it's very similar to us giving people methadone. I think that it would be, just easier to give people methadone. I mean, the thing with methadone, because it's so long acting, and it's a really safe opioid for the most part. But I would make easier access to it. You could make, and I don't know if I give Adderall to meth users, although when I worked with meth users, I did give some meth users Adderall, and guess what? Some of them got better. But the research suggests that it doesn't work, but every once in a while, case by case. So if I'm substituting a pill of speed for someone injecting, that's harm reduction. So I would make it just, you'd have to have a program in place, but I would have a pretty open dispensary. Obviously count how much you're giving people, have them come back, give them 4 low-dose oxycodone tablets and have them come back the next day. And that's kind of what they do. So I would, I don't think, but I just feel like you gotta do something different.
When people go to a low dose to get a low dose oxycodone when they can get fentanyl, do they score
Yes.
oxy? Is
Well,
that enough?
Maybe I'll have John answer the question, but I think, and this is where, yes, if fentanyl use is illegal, I'm gonna take you to jail, but would you rather go to this clinic and we'll give you something better than methadone, to take every day, but you also have to start a program. So, it's kind of what methadone already is, but I think your point is because the high with fentanyl is so intense that when people accept something, that's either injected or, that take a pill instead of injecting structure around it in terms of the small track to being incarcerated.
We have time for one more question.
I was wondering if you had any thoughts about San Francisco versus, Bay Area counties, or just California, rural counties, or who's doing it well, do you think, and good value for money with the state?
So in terms of managing this,
Opioids, I'm thinking,
it's a good question. I have to say I'm not sure if anybody's doing a good job with this. I guess, maybe I'm holding San Francisco to too high of a standard. The city that knows how, that if anybody in California should be pushing the envelope, it should be us. I don't get this timidity, and is it just a political calculation? This constituency has no power. If you want to compare it to gay marriage, and in fact I read this today with the research, is that the same language was used prohibiting gay marriage as now prohibiting drug use. Exact same language. And Governor Newsom, to his credit, advocated for it, and it became law, gay marriage. But to be cynical for a second, think of the constituency of the LGBT community, generally pretty connected, pretty educated, whereas these guys out in the street, they don't have any, they give you no traction politically. They're a detriment politically, so it's easy to kind of, So I don't know, but if San Francisco's not going to do it, who's going to do it? LA maybe. That was a pilot. To me, he vetoed that bill because he had presidential aspirations, period. Because if he ran for president, the Republicans come and say, this guy, do you know what he did? And he wasn't going to take that risk. I'm pretty sure that's the reason I vetoed it. Sorry, a little cynical. Also accurate.
So it's funding state consumption site research. I don't know the details, but they're funding that now, so there will be a paper out that's showing. So that's part of the problem. There really has grant. There's no scientific cover for state consumption sites in the United States, and only limited international support for them. But I think once we get them, and if we say it's about us, not about them, right? I think it will happen. That'd be my bet.
Any closing remarks before I?
No, I just thank you for coming out tonight and being an attentive audience and allowing me to rant and rave a little bit. I was going to take my jacket off and refer to myself as like John Madden. You all remember John Madden. I'm not quite that heavy. My hair's a little bit more coiffed, and I'm not that of an outsized personality. So I'm like a poor man's John. Those are my closing remarks. Yes.
Folks, and if I could just grab the podium there for a minute, I'll do a little dance with you, Paul. So that concludes our program for tonight, but before we end, I want to let you know again that we have copies of Paul's book on the table in the back, Danger to Self, which we alluded to a little bit earlier, and Andy and I and others on the team would be happy to help you if you're interested in purchasing a book tonight. So please let us know. And if you enjoyed tonight's event and think you might want to become a member of Mechanics Institute, you probably got a flyer when you first came in the door tonight. And we'd love for you to become more engaged in the community here and become a member if you aren't one already. I know we have a lot of members in the audience and a lot who are not. There's a lot of great membership benefits, which you can find out more about by just pressing that QR code on the flyer. And if you sign up for an annual membership before the end of October, we will be providing a free month as part of that, so you get 13 months for 12. We're filled with activities here all the time. Author talks, book clubs, writing groups, discussion panels, chess classes, and library membership also allows you to use our beautiful two-story library dedicated to general interest books and particular. Yeah, we'll do the film too. I'll get there. Books on California history as well, and we have a very robust chess program here also, which you'll find out more about if you look at our website. And yes, Friday night films through our Cinema Lit program. Thank you for throwing that in. Again, thank you for joining us in this historic place tonight. We were so thrilled to have you be part of the audience. I hope you enjoyed the talk by Paul as much as we did. And again, we hope to see you back soon. Take